Welcome to today's weekday reflection, and today I'm reading from Matthew chapter 7 verses 1 to 5. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way as you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother or sister's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother or sister, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother or sister's eye. Today, I'd like to leave you with a riddle. What am I? I maim without killing. I break hearts and ruin lives. I'm cunning and malicious and gain strength with age. The more I am quoted, the more I am believed. I flourish at every level of society. My victims are helpless and cannot protect themselves against me. To track me down is near impossible, and the harder you try, the more elusive I become. I'm no one's friend. Once I tarnish a reputation, it is never the same again. I topple governments. I wreck marriages. I destroy friendships. I divide families. I inflict pain on the innocent. What am I? My name is slander and gossip. In Matthew 12, verses 36 to 37, Jesus warns us that every idle word we speak, we shall have to give an account of on the day of judgment. For by our words we shall be justified, and by our words we shall be condemned. How seriously do we take into account that one day we will have to give an account not just for what we have done, but for what we have said? How seriously do we reflect upon what we say and the damage that our words cause other people? How measured are we in our speech? The letter of James is filled with warnings against careless speech. James chapter 1 verse 19, let everyone be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to anger. And then in verse 26 of that same chapter, James says, if anyone thinks they are religious, but do not bridle their tongues, they are deceived in their hearts, and their religion is worthless. In James chapter 3 verse 5, James says, the tongue is a fire which sets forests ablaze. With it we praise God, and with it we curse others. Within the past 24 hours, we have seen and heard the fallout of Harry and Meghan's explosive tell-all interview with Oprah Winfrey. There is no doubt that when we are victims of perceived wrongs, or when we feel hurt by others, or when we feel that we have been unjustly betrayed, we are quick to want to justify ourselves, to tell our side of the story and to put ourselves in a good light. But in so doing, we often don't stop to measure our words, or to think through the implications of what we are saying, or to consider carefully the damage that might be done to others and our relationship of trust as a result of our careless words. We all know that when we are in physical pain, our ability to cope is diminished. Similarly, when we are emotionally drained or overwhelmed, our tolerance threshold is diminished. Suddenly everything and everyone is irritating and annoying. Everything is seen as a personal attack. Our view of other people can quickly become skewed by our own fears, frustrations, and problems. We become increasingly suspicious, negative, and critical of others. We become increasingly conscious of everyone else's faults and weaknesses, and increasingly blind to our own. We see the speck of sawdust in our brother and sister's eyes and blind to the plank in our own. It's extremely easy for us to see things which are not there, or to read into situations things which were never there, to interpret innocent comments negatively, like a warm bed on a cold night, self-affirming slander and self-affirmation can quickly become a source of comfort and support. There's a story I once heard about a man who pulled into a service station. The attendant came over and washed his windscreen. The driver, in a somewhat curt manner, asked him to do it again, believing it still to be dirty. The attendant politely obliged and washed the windscreen again. The driver, in a somewhat agitated voice, however, asked him to do it again, pointing to a particular spot on the windscreen, which he believed to still be dirty. At this point, the man's wife leant over and removed her husband's glasses, cleaned them and placed them back upon his nose. Looking at the clean windscreen in front of him, the driver, instead of acknowledging his error or apologising to the attendant, exclaimed, "It's a good thing that at last you got it right." One of Harry and Meghan's claims to Oprah was a failure by the royal family to protect them from the media, to protect their reputations, which they believed to be damaged by various negative media reports. Yet it was to the same media that they turned to unleash a barrage of complaints and allegations which fundamentally undermined the royal family's reputation and standing, and no doubt the trust that they once had. They effectively did to their family the very thing they claimed had been so damaging to their own emotional well-being. American journalist Will Norris wrote, "In order to keep one's lips from slips, 5 things observe with care: to whom you speak, of whom you speak, and how, when, and where." In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11, Paul writes that we are to encourage one another and to build one another up. How easy it is to encourage and build others up with words of praise and encouragement, words which bring healing and reconciliation. But instead, we fall back increasingly and most often on words of criticism and blame. There's another story I heard about a woman who moved from the city into a small country town, and she did nothing but complain to her neighbour about various people in the town, how unfriendly they were and how poor the service was in the town compared to the big city. One particular object of her complaint was the owner of the local general store. According to her, the service was poor and the quality of the goods second rate. A couple of weeks later, the woman had cause to go into the general store and was surprised to find the service was quick and efficient. The owner of the store was friendly and offered to help her and her family settle into the town. Amazed by this perceived turnaround in behaviour, the woman went to visit her neighbour. "I guess you told the owner of the general store how bad I thought his service was, because he has certainly improved his attitude." "Well, not exactly," replied the neighbour. "I hope you don't mind, but I actually told him how impressed you were by his service and that you thought his store was one of the best you'd ever been in." It's amazing what change a few simple words of encouragement can bring about. In Psalm 39 verse 1, King David wrote, "I will guard all my ways, so that I will not sin with my tongue. I will guard my mouth as with a muzzle." I will not sin with my mouth. I will muzzle my mouth. Many years ago, there was a group of brilliant young male writers at the University of Wisconsin. This group of men appeared to have extraordinary literary talent, and they would meet regularly to critique each other's work. However, they were so merciless in their criticism of each other's work, believing that such criticism would bring the best out of each other, that eventually they named themselves the Stranglers. On the same campus, there was a group of women writers who called themselves the Wranglers. But instead of criticising each other's work, they looked to affirm and encourage the best in one another. 20 years after leaving university, not one of those brilliant young male writers had achieved any notoriety as a writer. By contrast, the Wranglers have produced half a dozen successful writers, including the Pulitzer Prize winning author of The Yearling, Marjorie K. Rawlings. What a contrast. If anyone has the right to be critical of us, it's God. He knows all our faults and our weaknesses, and yet we read in the scriptures of God's amazing love and grace and affirmation of us as his children, and his desire to bring the very best out in us. Gossip and slander and self-affirmation can be scintillating and can draw us in. We love to hear some gossip. But we need to think carefully about what we listen to, and even more about how we speak, as to whether our words are accurate and true, or exaggerated and possibly false. Whether our words are kind and uplifting, or whether they are cutting and diminishing. Whether our words are necessary and helpful, or whether they are needless and harmful. Whether our words are encouraging and affirming, or whether they're discouraging and diminishing. Therefore today, before we speak, let us stop and reflect upon the impact our words might have on others, and to assess whether our words are building up and affirming others, or whether our words are pulling down and diminishing others. Whether we are stranglers or whether we are wranglers. Remembering that our words not only reflect the type of person we are and how we feel, but they shape the type of person we ultimately become. Remembering that by our words, we too shall be judged. Well, thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to having you join us next week for our weekday reflection.